Holy shit, fanboys and fangirls. This is Fanboy With An Opinion for August 2020. I am Eric, and I am your fanboy. So, as you might remember, last month in July, I had a lot of technical difficulties. It ended up being a short episode, and I wasn't able to talk about a lot of the comics I bought. So, that's what we're going to try to do today. And also talk about things that I've watched and whatnot. But before I begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. And also, I'm wearing my book t-shirt. So I wrote a book. It's called Champ, Misanthrope of the Year. You can find it on Amazon if you just put in my name, ERIK, and Champ, Amazon. All right, let's get started. Let's see, what have I been watching and doing? So I did want to mention there was this comic book writer, Dennis O'Neil, who had died a few months ago. And, it would have been more appropriate to talk about it in last month's episode, but I didn't get to. So I'll be real quick about it. He was a big, prolific comic book writer. He wrote for a lot of Batman, mostly known for doing Batman, but he also did a big run on Green Arrow and Green Lantern, where he introduced that Green Arrow's sidekick was doing heroin. It was like 60s or 70s, so it was kind of a big deal. Comic books wanted to talk about drugs. Marvel had already done it with Spider-Man, but the publisher didn't want them to focus on hardcore drugs, so they talked about opioids, which is a problem, but in the 70s it was more of a hard drug issue. So Denny O'Neil pushed to talk about heroin. He dealt with a lot of social issues. He was probably one of the first comic book writers to really do that more than just like once. He talked about racism, classism, stuff like that. Anyway, he wrote one of my favorite Batman stories, which I've mentioned before, and it's called Batman Venom, speaking of drugs. And there's a lot of artists on this, but one of the artists is a Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, which is one of my favorite comic book artists of all time. He did a lot of the covers. He did the covers. I think he might have done some of the inking. So basically, it's a story about Batman who tries to save this little girl, and he can't. She was kidnapped. She dies. He can't save her because he wasn't strong enough. Her father ended up being a chemist who created this drug that gives you, not super strength, but gives you strength on a quicker basis than like steroids would. And eventually it's called Venom. So a name that might sound familiar because it eventually becomes the drug of choice for Bane for a good chunk of his career. So anyway, Batman ends up getting addicted to this drug, and he's being used by the scientist, and eventually he has to kick the habit, which he ends up just putting himself in the Batcave for 3 months, and just because Batman's will is unprecedented. Also, what Denny O'Neil did was he kind of took Batman out of the hokey 60s era, and he made him a little bit more realistic and gritty. And in this series in particular, he has Batman fight a Great White, which is infamous from the TV show. But he didn't have a bat shark repellent like he did in the 60s TV show. But it's good nonetheless. It's a good, again, realistic look of how someone might defeat a shark if you were Batman. Anyway, I love that book, and I'm reminded of that now that Denny O'Neil's gone. One of the things my wife and I have been watching is on Netflix, they brought back the TV show Supermarket Sweep. And this was a game show from the 90s, so late 80s or early 90s. I mean, they brought it back a few times and went all the way to like early 2000s. And it was about this basically the rules were that you were able to run around a supermarket and grab whatever you wanted, and whatever team had the most expensive items or the biggest total, the most expensive total, won. And then they got to win the cash prize of $5,000, which is fucking nothing. Like, compared to the shit they have to get through, it's like a lot of whittling down. Like, they have to do a lot of trivia questions to see how much time they can get in the supermarket, and then they have to run around like morons trying to pick up rotten meat. So this was filmed in an actual, it was a studio meant to look like a supermarket. And there's been reports that a lot of the food in the supermarket wasn't exactly ripe. Or I should say that it smelled ripe. They weren't fresh. And most of it was the meat. A lot of the beef, and you could see it in the show. Like, if you watch them go over to the beef section, a lot of the beef is not red like it's supposed to be. It's darker. And so there were reports that it smelled terribly. And so they run around and they answer these stupid questions to see how long they can have enough time to run around like morons, and they pick up groceries. And it's just such a ridiculous, silly show. Just to go through that for $5,000, which, even in 2000 really wasn't. I mean, look at the other shows. I mean, think of it this way. This show was on the air at the same time as Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So they could have upped the ante a little bit better. And now they want to bring the show back. Leslie Jones, who is more famous for being in SNL, there's rumors and stuff, news that she wants to bring the show back on the air, which I'm very interested in. Anyway, it's such a goofy show. It's like something to watch when you don't want something too serious or too heavy, and just something to laugh at. Because it is in the early 90s, and a lot of them, their hair and their outfits and their clothes are ridiculous. And it's also fun to see the products, food products and whatnot, that don't exist anymore. A lot of times you find yourself going, what the hell is that? Or, saying, oh, I remember that. These discontinued food items or what have you. It's pretty silly, though. It's pretty good. It's funny to see the progression of the show, because like I said, they did take breaks, and they would come back and they would say the brand new supermarket sweep. We're always finding new ways to give you more time, and no, they weren't. It's always the same games, and they might have added 1 or 2 games. It still results in the same amount of time. And I think the later games, they give you less opportunities to get time than they did in the older shows. I mean, there's the thing, you look at the audience, and to make it look like the audience is bigger, they put mirrors at the end of the aisles to make it look like there's more people. And they shoot it terribly later on, where you could see the mirrors, whereas earlier, maybe it wasn't really that noticeable. Anyway, I've been watching that. I watched Umbrella Academy, but I think I've already mentioned that in Gamers Group Pod, which we do every week. My wife and I watched this HBO docuseries, crime docuseries called I'll Be Gone in the Dark. It's an interesting story. It's actually about, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the stand-up comedian Patton Oswalt. He was on that shitty show, King of Queens. Everyone's Got to Make a Buck. He was in Ratatouille. Everyone's Got to Make a Buck. His first wife was a crime novelist, Michelle McNamara. And she had, she was like an online crime sleuth. So it was like a group of people who do research, or they investigate cold cases. And they sometimes use techniques that cops don't usually use, or programs that cops don't usually use. I think sometimes the mentality is that the cops are using an older mindset, whereas online sleuths are more technologically, not advanced, but more technologically capable. Anyway, so Michelle started off as like an online sleuth. And she was interested in this cold case, the Golden State Killer. So the Golden State Killer was a rapist who started to murder. And his cases have been cold for like 30, 40 years. And so she started to investigate this. She got a lot of good information, also with help of other people in the online community. She had enough to write a story about it, which then snowballed into a book. And so the docuseries talks about the Golden State Killer, his crimes, but also talks about Michelle and her writing the book and balancing that with family and trying to be normal, because honestly, this crime kept her up at night, like literally. It gave her sleeping problems. And I say that this is Patton Oswalt's first wife because she actually died a few years ago while still writing the book. And they say it's partially because this crime just, like I said, kept her up. So she kept taking sleeping medication, and the combination just eventually accidentally killed her. So then Patton had to finish the book. He finished the book with the help of other people, and they ended up publishing it. So it's a really, really good docuseries from HBO, combining the crime and her life and getting the book out. And, eventually, spoiler alert, eventually he was caught. He was like 72 years old. He's being prosecuted as we speak, or tried. He's being tried as we speak. But yeah, it was horrific crimes because he a lot of victims, and it just was interesting because his pattern of crime resulted in 4 different suspects. Like, they thought these crimes were done by 4 different people because he constantly changed his MO. And if anyone's familiar with serial killers don't usually change their MO. In the beginning, they might tweak it, but like in the beginning, he just robbed houses. And then he started raping. And then he started raping and murdering. And most of these groups of crimes happened around the same time and the same area. Like the same neighborhood. And it happened for a long time. Anyway, very interesting. And yeah, but it's not for everybody because it is pretty graphic and is about real crime. Let's see. Oh, we watched Terminator Dark Fate. We watched that a few days ago. Yeah, not good. Not good. We watched Terminator Genesis, which was the movie before this. And we actually enjoyed that. Like, everyone seemed to hate it. But we seemed to enjoy it. We enjoyed it. It was stupid, but it was like fun stupid. And, I don't like James Cameron. I think that after The Abyss, no, True Lies. After True Lies, his career just dipped. I don't like Titanic, and I especially don't like Avatar. And I think he's a blowhard. And I think that people, his name holds some sort of weight for whatever reason, because he was involved with this new one with Dark Fate, and it still was shitty. And then everyone's like, oh, he's involved, so it's got to be good. No, it wasn't. The movie before this, Genesis, he actually came out on record to say it was a great movie. So it had his seal of approval, and it still fucking sucked. And then he's involved in it, and it still fucking sucks. So it's also very confusing because a lot of these movies are negating or getting rid of, reestablishing continuity over and over. So Genesis got rid of, Genesis was basically the first movie. So 2 was gone, 3 was gone, Salvation was gone. Everything was gone. And it talked about how Kyle Reese went into the past to help Sarah Connor, but Sarah Connor was already getting help from a Terminator and all this junk. In Dark Fate, they've got rid of that, but also got rid of 3 and Salvation. And this is a continuation from 2. And the worst part about it is, spoiler alert, in the beginning of the movie, you see John Connor as a teenager from 2 murdered by a Terminator. So it's like, what the fuck is the point? And now they killed John Connor. The future has been changed. But then a new company just rises, and that starts an AI, and that starts Armageddon. So it's like a rehash, but then a reboot at the same time. It was just, I didn't find it boring, but I found it unnecessary. Because it wasn't bad, but just unnecessary. And it was directed by Tim Miller, who did Deadpool. So the action was pretty good. Not needed. Not needed at all. Yeah, I think that's about does it for what I've watched. I wanted to get into some of the comics that I read. So I bought these comics like a month ago, and I just wanted to go over some of them. I had already recorded a segment where I talk about one of them called Irredeemable. I'll put that in soon, but I just wanted to go over some of the other ones that I bought. Well, I bought this one called Mrs. Tree. I like hard crime, and I think I've already established that, and mystery and stuff. So Mrs. Tree is about a private detective. And this came out in like the 80s and the 90s. I think it started in the early 80s. And they finally collected it. And I had been wanting to read the series for a while. So her husband was a private detective, and her husband is murdered. And then she takes over, she basically takes over the business. Which it's under her name though, but it's just she takes over his occupation. It's briefly based on a hard crime novel series called Mike Hammer, where she's influenced, she's influenced by one of those characters from the Mike Hammer series. She's really hard-boiled. She's kind of badass. She's always kicking people's butts, and I think that the whole reason, she's a woman, so then men especially underestimate her, and that gives her the opportunity to kick some ass. The problem is that, I don't know, they kind of play on the stereotypes of I read some of this, and I did enjoy what I read, but it is a little outdated. And she's strong and, like I said, pretty much a badass, but she doesn't always come off looking very feminine. And she shoots a lot. There's a story, there's a lot of standalone stories. There's one story in particular where she meets a guy that she was in love with in high school, and then he basically seduces her, and she falls for it. And it doesn't seem like someone of that caliber would really just go with that, because she has a very good sense of when she's being played. And she's smart, she's supposed to be established as a very smart person, and then just kind of falls for this pretty boy that she had a thing for in high school. And then, of course, it turns out that he was manipulating her, but while he was seducing her, he did fall in love with her. And basically, he gets her to kill his wife. He manipulates her into it. But then he's like, oh, I really do love you. But then he just gets murdered by another woman that he had seduced. I just feel like it's kind of cliche, and establishing this really strong character doesn't really seem like that they would fall for that so easily. So she doesn't listen to her instincts, but it's more just like, well, I'm a woman, I follow my emotions. And then later on in the book, she gets pregnant, which is just like, why is that necessary? But maybe there's a reason for it. I'm still interested in it. I got this. Is called Spider-Man Life Story. This was fucking amazing. It was written by Chip Zdarsky and drawn by Mark Bagley. Mark Bagley is like a premier Spider-Man artist. He's been drawing Spider-Man. I mean, a good chunk of his career was just drawing Spider-Man. So this is an interesting one. This is about, so, you know, Spider-Man was created in 1962. Basically, this tells the story of like, what if Spider-Man grew up, you know, because his characters never grow up. Like Spider-Man's been 30 for like close to 40 years. So what if Spider-Man grew, his age, you know, he grew older in real time. So it starts off in the 60s, him as still as a teenager. Well, college age. It's like the late 60s. And it goes to the 70s, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and the 2010s. And the interesting thing is it combines two things. It combines Spider-Man mythos, so it talks about some of his famous storylines, and it also deals with real life, you know, real life events. So like his best friend, one of his best friends, Flash, goes in the army, goes to Vietnam, and later you find out that Flash died in the war. Other characters are brought up. Other characters have like cameos, or they're part of the story. Like Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic. I love the covers. The covers are really cool. They tell like an idea of, so there's Cap, right? And I have a problem with the Cap cameos is because Cap, you know, Cap sees Spider-Man, and just like Spider-Man's friend Flash, Captain America has been drafted into the Vietnam War. And at the end of that issue, you see that he's gone against America, and he's actually protecting some of the Vietnamese villagers from the Marines, protecting the villagers from the Marines. We never hear anything else about that. You know, like, it seems like Cap and Iron Man are at opposite ends and fight a lot in the book, but we never see the end result in that. I'd like to know more. I mean, so the Cap that we see later in the book, is that even the same Captain America? Because, you know, of course, they deal with Civil War eventually later on. And you know, like in the comics, Spider-Man looks up to Iron Man. Well, not in this version. So, you know, is that the same Cap? And if that's the same Cap, how did America deal with the fact that he kind of fought for the enemy, sort of? So things like that they don't touch up on or don't talk about. But other than that, I mean, this is probably one of the best Spider-Man stories of all time. I mean, it really gets into a lot of his famous stories, but in a different angle, because now he's older in some of them. But again, some other characters, like one of the Gwen Stacy, she's important for a while and then she just disappears and we're never heard from again. Of course, it's his relationship with Mary Jane that's very constant and very strong. They even talk about, there's this infamous Spider-Man story called Superior Spider-Man where Peter Parker died, and Dr. Octopus put his existence into Spider-Man's body. So he was Spider-Man for like a year, over a year. Even that's fucking brought up in this. Miles Morales. I mean, it's great. It's it just obviously each issue deals with a different decade. So there's only so much you could put in each issue, but ZeusDrkStr still does a pretty damn good job. And again, this has got to be one of my favorite Spider-Man stories. I mean, this was such. It was very difficult to put down, to say the least. I don't want to give too much away, but there's some interesting things in this. What happens to Peter and what he decides to do. He gives up the Spider-Man outfit for a while. So Moreland is a character. He's basically like a vampire. And there's this whole long storyline that's in the Spidey books about Spidey being a part of a totem. A totem basically has people who are emulating animals. So Spider-Man is a part of the spider, obviously, because that's where his powers come from. So Moreland goes after these people who are part of the totem and essentially just sucks their energy out. And Moreland ended up being like a very difficult character, for a very difficult villain for Spider-Man to defeat. And even that's in here. I mean, this is like Spider-Man lore. It's just a time-traveling adventure through Spider-Man's lore. I really did love it. I definitely have to reread it too. I bought Lock and Key, which was written by Joe Hill, Stephen King's son. I haven't read this yet. There's a Netflix TV show based on this, which I have not seen yet. It's about the father of the family who recently died, and his widow and his kids inherit this big mysterious house where all the kids get their own key, and all the doors lead to different dimensions. I'm excited to read that. I got this one book called Bitch Planet, and it is about a planet full of female prisoners. It's supposed to like pay homage or make fun of old 70s female prison movies. And yes, that is a subgenre. It's just all female prison movies. And then the last thing I got was The Wicked and the Divine. By the way, the last three I just mentioned were, well, Bitch Planet, Wicked and the Divine, or Image, and Lock and Key, I think, was Dark Horse. No, IDW. And of course, Spider-Man is Marvel. Mrs. Tree, I don't know what the fuck this is. Titan Comics. I got them all on Amazon. So the last one is The Wicked and the Divine. I love the art. Jamie McKelvey. I just like the art. The art's really cool. It's very clean. The clean lines. Very pretty. So this is about every 90 years, 12 gods return as young people. They are loved, they are hated. In 2 years, they are all dead. It's happening now, it's happening again. This has gone on for a bunch of years. I've always been interested in it. The series actually just ended a year or two ago. So, also, another quick explanation. These are what's in the business. It's called a trade paperback. So a trade paperback collects what were individual issues into a bigger collection. If anyone is ever looking to get into comics, because, if you're looking into getting into comics, I mean, you're talking about history that's 80 years old. So my advice is, instead of going month to month and buying individual issues, go for trades. What I would suggest is to look for your favorite character, let's say Batman, and research what are his best stories. And then you buy those trades. See, look in the back. There's Year One, there's Dark Knight Returns, there's this other shit that I'm not even going to talk about. but yeah, I mean, that would really be the way to go, because to collect individual issues week to week, it just doesn't make sense. Definitely did the trades, and even indie well, I mean, Image is kind of indie, but not really. But indie comics like this are also a lot of these. Think of you think of Superman or Batman or Superman or Spider-Man. They're kind of like network TV shows. They just go on and on and on and on and on. But when you go for the indie books, usually they don't go as long. Maybe they're at most a few years long, 5 years long. And that might be easier to collect. Because like The Boys is a perfect example. The Boys I think it was like 6 years. And so there are a lot of volumes of graphic novels, trade paperbacks. But, it's still doable. It's better than getting 80 years comics worth of Batman or Superman. But yeah, that's about it. Some of these I've read, some of them I haven't. I have to get into them. But now I'm going to segue into the main part of this. I talk about a book called Irredeemable. And you will notice I look a little different. Because I had recorded the segment like a few weeks ago. So here you go. What up, everyone, and welcome to this segment. So I bought one of the books I bought recently. It's a book called Irredeemable, which is from Boom Studios. Boom Studios is a little bit smaller comic book company compared to like Marvel and DC. So it's a big boy. It's pretty beefy. So originally, these came out as being hardcover collections. And I had a few of them, but then they went out of print. But recently, they just collected everything in an omnibus. And typically, omnibus is what you see here, pretty big. So this is the entire series. So Irredeemable was 37 issues in total. It was written by Mark Waid, who is a legendary comic book writer. He's pretty much written every major character between, the two big Marvel and DC. Superman, Daredevil. Actually, his Daredevil run is one of my favorite Daredevil runs. It was amazing. Spider-Man, Flash. He wrote for the Flash for way over 10 years. And it's drawn by a guy named Peter Krause. And there's a few artists in this. Peter Krause pretty much, he's cited for co-creating this book, but he only does like maybe the first part of the series. And then it's taken over by somebody else. So to explain this book, it's about a Superman analog. So a Superman-like character. I think it was Barreto. Barreto is the second artist. So it's about a Superman-like character or analog named the Plutonian. And it's what would happen if Superman went evil, basically. I mean, that's like in a nutshell. That's like the most basic overview of this book. I mean, obviously it's a lot more deeper than that. So Plutonian goes evil. Now, I'm gonna tell you right off the bat, the biggest problem I have with this book is the storytelling. So a lot of the medium, whether it be books or TV shows or comic books or even movies. So they start off with the big event already happening. So whatever the basic plot is of a story, it's already happened. And then for the next hour, 2 hour, whatever it is, they go back and they start slowly showing you the building blocks of why this has happened, whatever the major point is. So for instance, in Irredeemable, it starts off with Superman, excuse me, the Plutonian, already evil. Now, the Plutonian goes by Tony, by his friends and other superheroes. So I'm just going to refer to him as Tony for most of this. Already starts off as Tony being evil. And then we have to go back and, you ask yourself, just like all the other characters, why? Why did he do this? That's not really that important because there's different reasons for why. And there isn't really any clear-cut, solid reason. So I'm not really crazy about this kind of writing style, only because for comic books, especially a comic book that doesn't go on for 10, 20 years, obviously Mark Waid had a vision. And his vision was that this was only going to last up to a certain amount of issues. Now, reading interviews and articles about other writers who do this, they don't always intend for the series to end at that number. Again, this was 37. Maybe he was thinking of 40, maybe he was thinking of 32, whatever the case may be. But he had in mind a limited amount of issues. Now, as he goes on, those issues might have gotten longer or shorter. So my problem is, instead of laying it all out for us as soon as the story starts, start with one point and then you go backwards. And when you're doing that, you sometimes change what your intention was. And if you start in the beginning with Tony, and then at the end of the book, Tony does progress, but sometimes that progression doesn't always connect. Meaning, is that something Tony would do? Am I reading about the same character? Yes, he's changed, but do the points match? From him going from point A to point B, does that match? Does it seem like the same character I first started reading about? Are they growing organically? Or are they growing correctly at all? So that's my big problem with this story. But anyway, the whole idea of an evil Superman intrigued me. So I set out to read the whole series, got stuck in the middle because they just stopped making those big hardcovers. And these things were humongous. And then this came out, and I was lucky to see that it came out not that long ago. And so I read the whole thing, and overall I did enjoy it. But again, sometimes it feels like the character, his goals, or maybe the reason why he is the way he is, change. All right, so I'm not, without giving too much away. So Tony was a part of a group, a superhero group called the, what the hell are they called? I just had it too. They were called the Paradigm. So the Paradigm was like this version of the Justice League, obviously. And there's a lot of different characters. And one of the characters, his name was Hornet. So everyone on the team had some sort of superpower, except for Hornet. Hornet was the only one that was just a regular guy. He was just like a regular crime fighter. And we learn a little bit more about him later on. But in the very beginning of the story, he's driving home frantically. And he's telling his wife to get the kids and to, that we're going to run away. They're going to run away. Well, Tony stops them and essentially murders his entire family, except for his little daughter. But he leaves, he kills a Hornet right in front of his daughter. He says something at the beginning to the kid like, "I'm a superhero." So the point is that Hornet, Tony knew that out of all the people on the Paradigm, Hornet would have been the one to advise, to come up with a plan to stop Tony. So Hornet's not necessarily the first hero he kills, but it's one of the first. And it's a strategical move on Tony's part. So that's how it just starts. And like I said, like we don't know who these people are. We don't know why Tony's crazy or Tony's evil. So we kind of meet some of the other paradigms. And there are a lot of people in the group, so I'm only going to focus on the more important ones. So Quibbit, another problem I have with this story is a lot of the names for the characters are kind of hokey, lack of a better word. Obviously, a lot of these words have meaning for Mark Waid and probably have a deeper meaning within themselves, like word history based on the characters, but it doesn't mean anything. So Quibbit, there's no necessarily leader of the paradigm. It seemed like it was Tony. And everyone, you got to understand that Tony is seen as literally like Superman. So everyone looked up to him. Everyone loved him. They don't understand why he does this. So it gets so bad that Tony, he becomes a mass murderer. Like, let's just lay it down. He murders the city that he swore to protect. So basically, Superman destroying Metropolis. He completely just murders everybody. So he's murdering millions of people. Then he ends up, I think, going to the Philippines and like causing the Philippines to sink. So he's just killing millions of people. So anyway, we get to the paradigm, and Quibbit is I'll just read what the Wikipedia says. He possesses a genius intellect and is capable of mentally rearranging component machinery to form whatever device he imagines. So he creates teleportation technology. So he's able to take a bunch of scrap metal and be able, or pieces of a computer, let's say, and able to create whatever he wants. So he has a problem with believing that Tony is actually evil throughout the series. And he tries to get the rest of the paradigm to like figure out where his secret lair is, how we can find out what's wrong with him or stop him, whatever it is. So early on, they find this woman who was Tony's girlfriend at one point. And she tells a story that, I believe he had rescued her from something, and he just started to sweet talk her, and they just started to date. And so they were dating for a while, and she was having like the time of her life. There were low points, and this is where we briefly hear about Tony's like arch nemesis, who I'll get to in a little bit. So, but she did say that there were low points. There were points when she thought that Tony would die, because of his adventures. But eventually, all in all, it was a good relationship. She worked at a radio station, so she was pretty much a reporter, a la Lois Lane. So there was a guy at work, Dan, I think his name was Dan, and she said that she really enjoyed her job, and there was a guy at work who was really into her. But he was harmless. Sometimes he came off as creepy, but he was harmless. So one day he grabs her and basically shoves her into a janitor closet and reveals himself to be the Plutonian. So her reaction is one unlike we've ever seen in comic book history. She wasn't elated. She wasn't scared. She even upset. She was upset, but for the wrong reasons. She started thinking that this was just a game for Tony Plutonian. That, a game to play on mortals, like, oh, look at this dummy. She really thinks I'm this person, and she doesn't realize that I'm actually a superhero who's secretly dating her on the side. And then he's like, no, like, he's trying to explain himself. I really like you. I'm really into you. I just want to be honest with you. And then she's like, oh, you're playing this sick game and I'm the butt of it. How dare you? That sort of thing. So her response is to then run into the DJ booth at the radio station and just just start telling all these coworkers, you know, Dan's a fucking plutonian. He just told me he's a plutonian. Like, and like, why would you do that? Like, what? You're that pissed off that the first thing you want to do is just ruin his secret identity. So then their reaction is like, oh shit, we should go on here and tell this to everybody because that's a great idea. Let's not think about this at all. So they start saying it on the air. And Tony gets wind of it. He gets really upset. And he jets off into space. And, you know, you got to, again, keep in mind, he's like Superman. So he's as fast as Superman, probably even faster, strong as Superman, maybe even stronger. So he's able to get to the satellite that the radio station uses. He's able to get to the satellite before the radio wave does. So he's able to fly faster than sound. He destroys the satellite. He gets back to the radio station. And he basically tells them, you all doomed yourself. Like, my secret identity is so, you know, no pun intended, secret, and so well sought after, that my supervillains will do whatever it takes to get this secret from you. They'll torture your families. I mean, he gets into great detail. Like, he mentions like sexual abuse, you know, I'll do whatever it takes for you to talk. Because they're like, oh, we're just not going to say anything. It's like, how long is that going to last? Like, when there's a gun to your wife's head, like, how long is that secret going to last for you? And so the girlfriend ends up telling this story. And then she says how they all quit. And most of them just ended up either running away or flat out killing themselves, you know, because the way that he reacted to it and told them that you're all endangering yourselves. And just knowing who I am, you're endangering yourselves, and not just yourselves, your family, your friends, whatever. I just felt like everyone overreacted in this situation. Everyone overreacted in this situation. And, you know, they go to find Tony's girlfriend and try to figure out what his secret identity was, because they just want to know, they want to be able to figure out information about him. Because that's the thing, is they're all on this team and they're all kind of friendly with each other, but not to the point where they knew his life. It's like that comment, like, you don't really know who your friends are. You don't really know who your loved ones are. You don't really know who your neighbor is. So anyway, she tells a story, and I just felt like this is like not in the very beginning, but pretty much close in the beginning of the book. And I just felt like it's an interesting story, but at the same time, everyone overreacted. Like, for her to get so upset that she decides she's just gonna tell everybody the secret, it just seems irrational. And I don't know, like, I don't want to jump the gun and say it's a misogynistic view on a woman, that she would just so overreact to the point where she would just tell everyone in her vicinity. It just seemed a little ridiculous. But I think the real point is the way that he reacted. And this is supposed to be a champion of the people, someone that everyone looks up to and loves. And he's telling these random people that you've doomed yourself and you're going to get your kids raped. I mean, he pretty much says that. So anyway, I'm trying to think of it. Tony really does a lot of fucked up shit. You know, he's become a mass murderer. He murdered well, I shouldn't say that. His sidekick, his child sidekick, kid, who had powers. He lobotomized him. And this team, you know, of the Paradigm are just trying to, like, hold on as much as they can. And, you know, he ends up murdering supervillains. He murders a lot of people. But then he starts to get distracted because he feels a bit of guilt about his kid, Sam, his kid sidekick. And so he gets a little distracted for a while the rest of the team are trying to like figure out how to stop him. Anyway, so I'll get to his main villain, his Lex Luthor, if you will. It goes by the name of, let's see if we can find it, Modius. So Modius is Plutonium's nemesis. And Modius also possesses a genius intellect and an extreme affinity for technology. So he's very similar to Quibbit in that sense. But it's not really explained, but he's able to transfer his consciousness into other things. So currently, well, for most of Plutonium's career, for most of Tony's career where they fought, he was in like an android body. So Modius is very interesting. I'm just going to jump ahead. So he tricks, for a while, he thinks he tricks Tony. He goes into the body of Tony's sidekick, Sam. And Tony figures it out almost right away. And Tony's cruel. Like, he's cruel. And he's, you know, he does these things out of cruelty. So I'm jumping all over the place. But basically, when he finds out that Modius is in Sam's body, he basically just burns Sam's face. And while he's talking to Sam as Modius, and he hasn't really said that yet, he says that he figured out at one point what Modius's whole reason for fighting Tony in the first place. So he says that like Modius never really wanted anything. Whenever he fought Tony, he didn't want money, he didn't want power. It was always like a way to torture Tony. You know, and they show like little clips. They show little scenes of battles that they have, and it's always like Tony getting the best of, Modius getting the best of Tony and somehow torturing him. And then Tony reveals that he figured, so he can never find Modius, as great as Tony is. And he found out that Modius had surveillance cameras that would follow Tony. And Tony found one of them. And he was able to route it back to Modius's secret hideout. And so Modius was creating robots of Tony, all replicas of Tony. And at first Tony thought that he was building an army. But when he found Modius seemed very shocked, surprised, and embarrassed. And then, he brought him to jail. And then he went back to destroy these replicas. And realized that he wasn't building an army, but he was in fact building sex bots. And that's when Tony realized that Modius was actually in love with him. And that was a very interesting twist. Because if Superman is supposed to represent, if Plutonium and Tony is supposed to represent Superman, and Modius is supposed to represent Lex Luthor, so what is Mark Waid saying? He's saying that Lex Luthor's true reason to hate Superman is because he loves him. So it's explained that Modius is such a psychopath. Modius is such a sociopath that he doesn't understand love, and he doesn't understand how to deal with love. So he's just so hateful for the most part that he doesn't know how to express his love. So he expresses his love through pain and torture. And it's also the idea of like, a lot of the time Tony had a girlfriend. So he was jealous. And it's this idea of like, well, if I can't have you, no one can have you. And it's a really interesting explanation of why Modius reacts through pain rather than love, because he doesn't know how to do love. So Modius is throughout the whole book trying to get Tony, and he tries to work with Tony a few times. He makes a lot of deals with Quibbit, but just ends up double crossing him because what he really wants, what Modius really wants, is to be with Tony. So I found that to be a very interesting thing that Mark Waid was saying, that maybe Lex Luthor actually loves Superman rather than hates him. So one of the other characters I wanted to mention from the paradigm was Betty Noir. Betty Noir. So Betty Noir she has these guns, and it's weird. Like, she's able to use her bullets blowing buildings. All right, so from Wikipedia, she has an uncanny aim with customized ammunition for dealing with specific threats. So it's not really explained till towards the end of the story. But she wasn't really tapping into her power fully. And she never really truly trained her or honed her power. But again, that's not mentioned till later. So she shoots these bullets, and these bullets can pretty much do anything she wants them to do. Now, she's married to another member of the paradigm, and his name is Gil, or Gilgamesh. And Gil is, okay, so he's a 2,000-year-old winged warrior. So basically, he's Hawkman, but mixed with Thor, because he talks in that like old English kind of thing, and he acts like one of those old warriors. And then they show a flashback of him being imprisoned with Alexander the Great. So he's been around a long time. And those 2,000 years are supposed to represent, experience. And he's supposed to be one of the most experienced members of the paradigm. He's a fucking moron. He's a goddamn moron. First of all, his wife, Betty Noir, is cheating on him with Tony. And Tony has this crazy fucking stalker relationship with Betty. I think they only banged once, but it becomes like the backbone of the story for a long time. And he's obsessed with her. He's fucking obsessed with her. Like, there's one weird, creepy scene where he's forcing a guy to have sex with his wife, to the guy's wife, but the woman is dressed like Betty. And like, he's forcing them to have sex the way he wants them to have sex. Betty's supposed to say his name and all this stuff. This fake Betty. So it's really sick. It's sick shit. But like, Gil doesn't even, at one point he says, oh, I had a feeling. Bullshit. He does this fucking thing towards the end of the book where he kills somebody without really thinking. And it kind of dooms their one chance at stopping Tony. Because I feel like Mark Waid is saying, you have all these years of experience and don't mean shit. A lot of these characters, if not most of these characters, are analogs or for superhero types, not maybe specifically, like I said, Tony is supposed to be Superman, but that doesn't necessarily mean Gil. I think Gil is just supposed to represent those older those characters who have a lot of experience, or just people who have a lot of experience. It doesn't mean anything. So anyway, Betty is important because when she has sex with Tony, and this was a long time ago, because a lot of things are told in flashbacks, there's this candle. It doesn't matter. Basically, when it's lit, Tony becomes powerless. He becomes human. So she had stolen some of the wax from that candle when they made love, or after they made love. I guess with always the idea of something might happen, or if it could happen. So that's like a big plot device that they tease for most of the book. And it's used, but then of course Tony doesn't die because of Quibbit, because Quibbit holds on to that hope that he should be, changed. The name of the book is Irredeemable. And that's a big point of the book, is Tony is past the point of being redeemed. But Quibbit just doesn't get that in his head. So a lot happens. It turns out Hornet, who seemed to be the only person who could stop Tony, made a deal with aliens. Aliens were supposed to take over the world. They tried to take over the world. The paradigm was fighting them, but these aliens were too strong for them. because it was like a whole galactic empire. So Hornet makes a deal with them that if they leave, he'll give them teleportation technology, which was something that they, at the time, they didn't possess. So they make a deal, and Hornet says, like, if we need you, or if I need you, I'll signal you. And of course, when Tony started to get bad, Hornet hit the signal. So eventually the aliens do come, and they do take Tony, and they're able to subdue him for a while. Of course, Tony comes back. I'm trying to think, there's a lot of good bits in the book. Okay, so there's a part where, so he's in space, and he's being taken prisoner, slave, by these aliens. And Quibbit and Modius go out in space to look for him. So Modius explains to Quibbit that all of Tony's powers are not physical. That, in fact, they're psionics. Psionics? I think I'm saying that. So he goes on to explain that all of his powers are basically rooted from the fact that Tony can manipulate matter. So Tony has all the same powers as Superman does. So Tony's heat vision is able to store energy, however different from ours, is capable of storing energy to do what the Plutonian does. Those aren't laser beams coming out of his corneas. They're what happened when he transfers kinetic energy to the air molecules striking his eyes, turning them into a stream of superheated gas. His Arctic breath is the opposite reaction, or the opposite effect. He can withdraw molecular motion from the air, reducing this temperature to sub-freezing. He can't emit X-rays from his eyes. Instead, he mentally alters the atomic structure of the objects he's looking at, making them more closer to electromagnetic radiation in general. That way, his brain can interpolate, I think I'm saying that, an image based on all the various EM wavelengths it can perceive that our senses cannot. So he's able to just manipulate things, matter, molecular structures. He manipulates the density of matter with a thought, whose skin and muscle harder than diamonds. So he's able to change the matter of his skin. He temporarily reducing the mass of solids he makes contact with so he can smash them. He changes the mass of solids so he's able to punch through it. So Quibbit says to him, like, oh, this is so obvious. Why didn't I think of that? And Modius says, you have thought of that a bunch of times. And he like did something to Quibbit to not remember those moments where he came up with these theories about how Tony uses his powers. But I really did like that moment because writers for Superman in general, I mean, specifically, they've come up with scientific ways of explaining Superman's powers. And this was probably best used or best done in Man of Steel, the movie Man of Steel. I didn't really care for that movie, but the point is, what I did like is that they scientifically explained how Superman gets his powers. So, you know, they eventually said that Superman is like a battery and he stores in solar energy and that's how he uses his powers, but like flight. So Krypton, the planet he was from, had a denser gravity pull. So that's why when he comes to our planet, he's able to lift up his body. And so again, explained in Man of Steel. Same thing I think for the Strength. But for Irredeemable, for Tony, it's explained that his powers aren't physical. I mean, he's able to just manipulate matter and molecular structure. That's fucking crazy. Because that means that he's more powerful than everyone just thought he was. And, you know, people like to put Superman character on a pedestal as if he was God. Tony pretty much is fucking God because he's able to just manipulate things. physical things. He's able to manipulate science, which is supposed to be a hard fact. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Getting into his past, so we are eventually told who he is and where he came from. And in my opinion, that's a little ridiculous. But before that, little by little, we're seeing what Tony was like as a child. So Tony was in foster care, and he was bounced around from house to house. And he always wanted a loving family. And sometimes he did. But once they realized he had powers, they pretty much treated him like not really a freak, but more of a monster. And so there lies the difference between Superman and Tony. So the whole point of Superman is that he was raised by these loving parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent. And so that gives him the basis and gives him his ideals, gives him his reason for being good, for wanting to do good. You know, that whole true justice and American way bullshit. But they give him love, they give him compassion. Even when they find out he's not from Earth. I mean, fuck, the first moment they see him, they know he's not from Earth. And they still give him a loving home. So that's supposed to be the difference between him and Tony. Tony never had that. And I call bullshit on that, because I do think that there would be a family that would accept him for who he was. But again, we then find out that he did have a family. It's just, so we find in the beginning that he teases that, but then he doesn't tell it till later on in the story, that there was a family that he loved. And his father, well, I shouldn't say that. There was a family who treated him well and raised him properly. But the father was very stern and basically instilled this ideology of like, we take care of others first before we take care of ourselves. And because of that, something happens and it kind of ruins his family life. There's one family in particular that he goes to see. And it's three adult people, two men and one woman. And one man seems like he has some sort of disability, mental disability. And the other man and the woman are not speaking, and they have these chalkboards around their neck. And whenever they want to say something to each other, they write it on a chalkboard. So turns out they're doing this because they're hiding from Tony, because they're afraid that if they speak, Tony will know where they are. He ends up finding them anyway. So it turns out that they were his foster brother and sister. And the mentally challenged man is also his foster brother. So he starts to tell the story about, you know, this was another foster family that he was living with, and they saw his powers and they were afraid of him. That's not actually true. So what had happened was the kid who's mentally challenged is the youngest. He's born, and Tony wants to hold him. I want to hold him, I want to hold him, I want to hold him. He finally gets to hold him. And of course, he can't control his powers. And so he holds him a little bit too tightly, and it causes brain damage. And the baby grows up with mental disability. So, you know, that's why they essentially threw Tony away. And he felt like they chose this kid over him. And so, you know, the brother and sister, the former foster brother and sister, are saying like, that's not true. You know, you were basically the cause of it. So he gets angry at the truth, and he murders the brother and sister, and he leaves the mentally challenged man by himself, which essentially is just going to starve to death, because he's got such severe mental illness that he can't even take care of himself. But that's the point of his upbringing, is that he didn't control his powers. He couldn't control his powers. And in doing so, people were afraid of him. So far down the line in the story, you know, again, we don't get his full story. So then later on in the book, we're then given more pieces or breadcrumbs, and we're supposed to put it all together. And it's like, does this really seem like, because he, you know, Tony saw himself as a hero. And that's another thing. He loved being the hero, but he loved the admiration. He loved the attention. And then one of the things that he says on more than one occasion is the idea of not being able to help everybody. And also that he was never given the appreciation he thought he deserved. You know, humans just wanted more and more and more. He saves a bunch of babies from a burning building, and then he's got to stop, you know, a train that's off the tracks. And then he's got to go and save a sinking ship. And like, he never had a moment to himself. And, you know, you could say, wah, this is the life you chose. You know, like, they say that. It's like when you complain about the occupational hazard, because isn't that, if you're going to be a superhero and you have the abilities to be able to see and hear everything around the world and be able to do something about that, and now you're complaining you don't get a moment off, isn't that a occupational therapy, occupational hazard? Anyway, he finally decides to just sit on the moon and have a moment to himself, far enough where he can't hear anybody. And of course, that's the moment that like a whole fucking like city or town, I think it was a city, the whole fucking city got destroyed because he just wanted one moment off. There's more to the story, but I'm not gonna go into it. So it's the lack of appreciation, the fact that he always has to be on. These are the things that drove him to the point of just being like, fuck it, I'm just gonna do whatever the fuck I want. And he literally just does whatever the fuck he wants. But then later on in the story, we're told in between foster homes, he decided he was gonna live in the wild by himself. So he goes out and he becomes like people, you know, he becomes like an urban legend. And he becomes, I think he's called Wolf Boy, because they don't know what he is, werewolf. And he's just this kid living in the woods, you know, and he's got these Superman powers, so he's able to just heat vision a deer and then just eat it. So he becomes an urban legend. So there's a kid who lives near the forest, and he decides he's gonna go and find the Wolf Boy and capture him. Of course, it doesn't go the way he planned. And Tony, which they were probably around the same age at that point, Tony ends up letting, like, the kid gets an avalanche of rocks on top of him. They're trapped under rocks. And Tony doesn't do anything to help him. And so he flies off because Tony realized that it was the first time in his life where he felt guilt. And he realized that he wanted to have a normal life. But he didn't help him. So the kid ends up going to the hospital with a full body cast. And of course, the medical bills and whatnot kind of ruin his parents' relationship. So he decides to run off. He runs off and he becomes a villain, petty criminal. And so during one of his heists, Tony comes and stops it. And so Tony recognizes the kid. What's down the dog? Max. Max. Tony recognizes Max as the kid who tried to find him in the forest. Now, Max doesn't recognize Tony as the Wolf Boy because I don't think he really saw his face. Tony starts to flip out, and he inadvertently crushes Max's hands. And the whole point of being Plutonian for Tony is Plutonian was a mask, and it was a role he was playing. You know, the savior. Everyone loves him. Everyone looks up to him. Well, that was the first moment where he showed his true self. And he was angry at himself that he did that, but he also showed Max who the Plutonian really was. So now Max is dead set on getting revenge. So he goes through this cockamamie idea of getting his body altered. So basically through experiments, he gets powers. He's able to like increase his strength and his density and whatever. So he goes to try to fight Plutonian, and he finds out that it doesn't work. He doesn't have enough power. And then he finds out that the more he stays awake, the stronger he becomes. So he ends up going on like a binge of just like not sleeping for like a week. And he's able to put a dent into Tony. But it's like at what cost? So he hates Tony, but he ends up just deciding it's just not worth it anymore. And he puts all this hate into Tony, and he realizes at one point that Tony reminds him of the Wolf Boy. He doesn't know why, but he does. And so his hatred for Tony just grows. So we see this character, Max, every once in a while throughout the book. And we find out that while Tony has gone from being good to bad, Max has gone from being bad to good. And his character's name is Max Damage, which I think is the stupidest fucking name for a fucking character. Like, it sounds like a fucking power tool or some shit, you know? Cut your bushes 50 times faster with Max Damage. It's just so stupid. Anyway, he becomes good, and he gets his own book called Unfuckable. No, that's not it. I can't remember. I'll go back to it. But Max becomes a thorn in Tony's side because he is the only villain to really knock Tony out, and Tony's never been able to, because it was only really that one time, and then Max Damage starts to like go more under the radar and continues his crime spree. You know, he gets in trouble a bunch of times, but I don't think he ever really butts heads with Tony as much as he did that one or two times. So Max has his own book called Incorruptible, which I want to read. So it's funny because it's like the two sides of the coin are flipped. But he's an important character, but again, he's barely shown. So I just feel like a lot of the things, you know, Tony is supposed to be this great guy, but secretly is not. So a lot of cuckoo bananas, space hijinks happens, and we find out where Tony's from, and I'm not going to get into it, but again, if he is a being that can manipulate matter, you can only imagine where he comes from. The end is very interesting. You know, Quibbit wants Tony to be good, and it just ain't gonna happen. But Quibbit basically manipulates Tony. So there's a part, so Tony's in this prison, this alien prison, and he's living in a dreamland in his own head. He's trapped in his own head. And in this dreamland, he believes that everyone has forgiven him, and he's a hero again. So I don't fucking understand. You're tired of humanity. You hate humans. You're tired of being their lackey. You're tired of being their savior, and they don't give you the fucking appreciation you want. You fucking murdered millions of fucking people. But what your true heart desire is to be loved again? I don't fucking understand it. You know, he goes to the UN at one point, and he basically tells them, I'm going to do to your country what I did to the Philippines. And all the leaders, well, they're not leaders, but all the ambassadors of all these countries, like, grovel at his feet and say, like, you can come to our country and be the king, you can do whatever the fuck you want. We'll give you anything you want, all the whores you want, anything you want, we'll give it to you. So if you want love, just go and fucking take it. He's not gonna fucking, Tony's not built to really truly love something. Just like Modi is. You know, he knows what love is, but he just can't, you know, Tony knows what love is, but he just can't execute it. He wants to be admired. That's not love. He wants to be praised. He wants to be worshipped. That's not love. So go to a fucking country and be their fucking fascist leader. Rule a country. They'll fucking fake love you. That's what you really want. It just makes no fucking sense. You're tired of everybody I mean, he does cruel fucking things, but then secretly he wants to be loved again. Makes no goddamn sense. If admiration and worship is what you want, you can fucking get that with those powers. So at one point he's in this prison in his own head, and it's like everything's back to normal. Like everyone's like, we forgive you. Wait, so now you feel bad for what you did? I don't understand. Again, the only thing that I can come out of it is he wants to be loved, he wants to be worshipped, he wants to be admired, but I don't know. He could get that if he wants. But he went about it the wrong way. And then when he comes back from the prison, from space, this whole fucking thing, he goes back to being an asshole. It's like, what? You just dreamed about being Superman again, and now you're going to be a dick. He wants to torture these people because the world thinks he's gone. So they kind of have like a big sigh of relief, and they start to make plans to like rebuild. And then he comes back, and then the president of the United States, who's like, because everyone's been murdered, they ended up having to give it to a general. I don't know what the fuck he was, chief of staff. I don't know what the fuck he was, but he's president now, and then he has to do a deal where he has to kill like 20% of the population just to release something that could possibly stop Tony. So the point is, he comes back, and that's not his heart desire. He could have tried to rebuild a relationship. No, he's just like, haha, motherfuckers, you thought I was gone, but I'm back. And I'm even worse, motherfucker. It just makes no god. Anyway. So Quibbit wants him to be good. And so he basically manipulates Tony into doing something good. And I wish I could give you the ending, but I really shouldn't. Let's just say Tony becomes an inspiration for other people. Before I finish this segment, which has gone on way too fucking long, and I don't know what I'm going to do about that. Reading this book, it reminded me of The Boys. Now, The Boys is currently a TV show on Amazon Prime, which I don't really care for, but that's neither here nor there. And it's written by Garth Ennis. It was a comic book written by Garth Ennis. Now, Garth Ennis is a writer, comic book writer. He has gone on record many, many times to say that he does not care for superhero comics. He didn't grow up with them. He doesn't understand them. He occasionally has written some superhero comics, and he's written for Punisher for many years, but that's not really a superhero. When he does write superhero comics or hint at superheroes, he usually bashes them in some way. For instance, he used Spider-Man as a punching bag. He had one superhero use his X-ray vision to look through Wonder Woman's clothes. Wolverine, he had Punisher shoot Wolverine in the dick, blow his dick off, and in the face. So the point is, he doesn't like superheroes. So The Boys, if you've ever seen the TV show or read the books, comics, you know that it's basically not Garth Ennis' love letter, but hate letter to superheroes. He really doesn't care for them. And he basically shows in The Boys that all superheroes are secretly just pieces of shit. And it reminded me of that when reading Irredeemable, because that, in a way, is what, in my opinion, what Mark Waid is saying. Now, again, Ennis has gone on record to say he doesn't like superheroes, but Mark Waid, on the other hand, has made an entire career of writing superheroes. So that's not really what he's saying here. But what he probably is saying is that this is a Superman we could get if he were to be raised differently. We've had a lot of stories where Superman was raised differently. Red Son is a famous story where he's raised in communist Russia instead of America. There's a parallel universe where he was raised in Nazi Germany. So obviously, depending on how he was raised, but then what does that say about psychology or people? You know, depending. So is it nature or nurture? So I feel like in the Irredeemable, he's saying nurture. I like you know, the things that he's saying about Lex Luthor. I do like what he's saying about the Superman kind of character. Also, Plutonium is white and he's blonde, very blonde. So he almost resembles the, you know, what the Nazis thought were as the perfect Aryan. You know, blonde hair, blue eyes, a Superman. You know, because the whole idea of a Superman had been around for a long time. I mean, this technically before the comic books. There's this idea of a perfect specimen, and that's kind of what the Plutonian represents. You know, it's interesting that he made him blonde. Of course, he doesn't want him to look like Superman, but on the other hand, he kind of looks like the perfect Aryan. Real quick about the art. I wasn't crazy about it. You know, I left out a lot of characters, actually. There's this one character, he was a twin, and him and his twin shared powers. And so when the one twin died, murdered by Tony, the left remaining twin gained a lot of that power. So he becomes very powerful to the point where he is able to defeat Tony. But the problem with that power is it starts to corrupt him. And so he becomes almost as bad as Tony is. The art's okay. A big problem I have with it, two things. One is it starts to resemble other artists. And two, you know, the thing with superheroes is, or the thing with comic books, is faces should look similar in every panel. They shouldn't change. But in this, I feel like the faces change from panel to panel. That's another thing is Tony changes his outfit. That's what he looks like when he's evil. He had changed his outfit. It's like John Bolton. We'll say John Bolton. I think it purposely meant to look like John Bolton if you follow politics. And so this is what he looked like when he was a good guy. And I just feel like I mean, it's expressive. Don't get me wrong. It's just something there's something off about it. And this is Peter Krause. And it changes a lot to different artists. And let's see, the artist starts to change. I don't know, the art's okay. It's not really about the art for me. It's more about the story. And the story is really what keeps you captivated. I mean, he just starts like, at one point when he comes back from space, he just starts burning holes into the earth. So he could just carve out his sign, his symbol, on the side of the earth, or I guess in America. Anyway, the art's okay. It's not horrible, but lots of times, especially with Peter Krause's work, it starts to change, and he just starts like emulating different artists, and the faces change. Like characters are supposed to resemble one face, and it just seems like the characters' faces change from page to page, which is very inconsistent, obviously. But I definitely recommend this. It's on Amazon. Original price is $50, but it was a lot less than that. I definitely recommend it. Oh, they also, I have said this in the past, but no one remembers. This is definitely a book they should turn into a TV show. Definitely. And this is one of my picks of like comics that should be TV shows at least. You know, I personally don't feel TV shows should go on for 10, 20 years. So they could definitely make this into a few seasons, and let's just not be the end of it. Stop beating a dead horse. You know, I mean, if you look on, there's tons of Superman analogs or like characters that have gone evil. And like if you go on the Wikipedia, like one of the things it says is Brightburn. Like this reminded me of Brightburn. And I wondered if you know, the James Gunn kind of had this in mind. Well, probably not, but it's possible either way. And this definitely does remind me of The Boys. But yeah, that was it. That's an hour-long segment talking about one fucking comic book. And that was my segment talking about Irredeemable. Man, that's some great stuff, huh? I don't remember any of it. So I guess that would do it for me. Like I said, thank you for watching and listening. Like, subscribe, and comment. Don't forget to join our Facebook group, Gamers Facebook group. We have other pods that we do. Don't forget to watch and listen to those. We have a Patreon, Gamers Network. Come help us help you. I got a book. And that's about it. So thank you once again. I have been Eric, and this has been my opinion.